Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Dr. Kate Boyd. I'm a professional pianist and I'm also a university professor. Today we're going to talk about fingering. Choosing fingering can be a real challenge. There's often printed fingering in the score, but it's hard to know if you are using the best option available to you. Well, here's the thing. You can't know. There is no perfect solution for fingering, but there are some best practices and principles that can help you at the piano as you choose your fingering. So today I'm going to share with you a few of the principles I use myself and also with my students for choosing fingering at the piano. By the end of this video, you'll have some concrete ideas for how to approach fingering at the piano that you can apply to the piece you're playing. Let's get started. In classical piano study, we put a lot of emphasis on learning your scales and your scale fingering. I know, this gets a bad rap and it bums people out. It's a cliche to talk about playing scales as drudgery that keeps people from enjoying playing the piano. But there's actually a good reason to learn your scale fingering and get to know it cold. Classical music consists of tons of scales and arpeggios, and the more solid you are with the correct or default fingering on those patterns, the easier it will be to plug and play when scales and arpeggios arise in the context of a piece you're learning. So my suggestion to you is to get in the habit of practicing your scales and arpeggios every day and get very, very comfortable and familiar with those fingerings. Having a default fingering as a starting point can be a valuable tool in your technique arsenal. Then, when you see a scalar passage in the music, look to see if it's one of the major or minor scales that you've been practicing, and then try to apply the fingering from that scale to the music. Now, sometimes a scale doesn't start on the first note of the scale, so you'll need to look carefully. What I mean by that is sometimes in context, the composer won't start on the very first note of the scale. They'll start somewhere in the middle of the scale and just keep going up. So you need to kind of discern when you're looking at a scalar passage in context what the actual key of that scale is. Now I'm going to show you a couple places where these patterns appear in the literature. The first place I'm going to show you is Mendelssohn's G minor piano concerto, and I'm at rehearsal F in movement 1, and I see alternating scales and arpeggios. So the scales come every other bar and arpeggios come every other bar. So looking at it, we see that is a B flat major scale. So all I'm going to do is label these scales. That is C melodic minor. And then I can see this one here. That is D melodic minor. And then 2 bars later, that is G melodic minor. So I can look at the fact that I have scales, and I've already pre-learned the fingering. I've already learned all my scales. I practice them in sixths and in tenths and in thirds, and so when it appears like this, then I know how to play it. So that is a chunk of music that's been pre-learned. Now looking at the alternate measure, the descending arpeggios, I see, so that is a diminished chord. So I am going to write that in, diminished. That's a diminished seventh. We would write that like that, but whatever. And then the next one, that is also a diminished seventh. And then coming down, the next one, that is a dominant seventh. So now I have these patterns of scales and arpeggios that I've pre-learned, and now this whole page seems way easier because I am plugging and playing the patterns that I've already learned. Now I want to take a moment to talk about triads. A triad is a chord that has 3 notes in it. At the piano, we practice and learn different inversions of these triads, and each inversion has a different default fingering using 1 and 5 as the outside notes. And so you'd use 1, 2, 5 or 1, 3, 5, but 1 and 5 are the outside fingers. But this is where it gets tricky. When you have a bass note and then you come up to play a triad, as a rule, you shouldn't put a 5th finger on the bottom note. Now, the reason for this is simple. The chord actually consists of the low bass note plus the 3 upper notes, so it's a 4-note chord, but they're just not played simultaneously. And so you can spatially imagine your hand spanning all of these notes with the upper three played by 1, 2, and 4, or 1, 2, and 3, depending on the size of your hand and the voicing of the chord, and the bass note being played by the fifth finger. Another way to think of it is you're moving back and forth between the bass and the middle of the piano, so playing 5 to 5 is actually less economical because you'll have to end up moving your hand the maximum distance in each direction. Whereas if you go from 5 to 4 or 5 to 3, you don't have to actually move your arm as far. Now I'm going to show you the Chopin Nocturne in F minor, Opus 55, number 1. So this is what I mean when I'm talking about bass notes together with their chords. So we have this, and that's all actually one chord. That's the same as if I were to go that, except this lower note is down 1 octave. So if I do this, as a 4-note chord, I'm going to play 4, 2, 1 on the top because my fifth finger is already taken. Now I'm just going to drop down an octave, and then I still do that. And now here, that's obviously an octave. But now this next one, if I bring that A flat up an octave, then I can go, so that'll be 5 and 3, 1. But now drop that down, and then... So thinking of the chord as belonging to its bass note will help you in fingering this. I'm going to show you the less effective fingering. If I were to go 5, and then 5, 3, 1, and then 5, and then 5, 2, 1, and then 5, 1. The reason I don't want to do that is because then I have to play 5 a lot more, and I'm traveling much further. If I go to here, my arm doesn't have to go as far because my fifth finger doesn't have to come up as far. But here, I have to bring my whole hand up, and it's easier to get disoriented. So I'm going to write in some fingering here. 5, 1, 2, 3, and then 5, 1, 2, 5, because it's an octave, that's why. And then 1, 3, and then 5, obviously, and then 1, 2, 3. And so you can continue on 1, 2, 4, and an octave, and then 1, 3. When you're putting in fingering for a relatively new piece, there's a catch-22 that sometimes come up, particularly when a piece is going to be very fast or virtuosic, like a Chopin etude, a toccata, or a fast sonata movement. The catch-22 is this. You can't play it up to tempo yet because you're only just learning the notes, but you're trying to work out your finalized fingering from this early stage to avoid having to change it later. Fingering can work great at a slower tempo, but then be extremely awkward at a fast tempo. So when you're putting in fingering, be aware of the final tempo and make sure that you're not putting in a lot of extra crossings and things that'll make it difficult or impossible to play faster. One thing you can do to check this is to try tiny little snippets of the passage at a faster tempo, even though you don't really know the whole passage yet, and then see how it feels. The general rule of thumb is when you play a passage faster, you're going to be more on the surface of the keys, and you're going to move your arm rapidly across the keyboard from left to right and right to left, and so you don't want your fingers to interfere with that easy left-right motion of your arm. Anything that introduces extra finger crossings that's going to slow you down, or trying to jump to like the fifth finger by moving your whole hand and then having to aim at the fifth finger at a fast tempo is something that you should avoid. This is from Liszt Liebestraum No. 3, and I'm in measure 37. I'm going to ignore the printed fingering here just to show you what I mean. What can often happen when students see these descending intervals like these sixths, they often go 1, 5, 1, 5, 1, 5, 1, 5. At a slow tempo, that seems to feel good, right? It feels like, okay, I'm doing each one, and then 1, 4, 1, 5, 1. And so that would be kind of a fingering that if there weren't fingering written in, you might try. But in fact, at a fast tempo, this is really hard to be accurate. And what you actually want to do is you want to group by hand position. And so that's what is happening here. If I show it this way, that is a chord. This is what we call blocking. and then I'm going to go and then jump. That's another one. And that's what the editor did in this fingering. So I'm going to go. So at a slow tempo, that doesn't feel any easier. It actually feels a slight bit more awkward because I have to remember the fingering on these in the inner parts of the chords. But at a fast tempo, it makes a lot more sense. And I use a rotation, which I've talked about. I've shown you how to do rotation. And then, right? And then you can go quite fast. And there's only 2 hand position changes. So that's an example of a place where at a slow tempo, I might have like stuck with 1-5, 1-5, 1-5, but at a fast tempo, that doesn't work at all. So the thing to be aware of is to figure out how it feels at a fast tempo. And if you're playing, like you're just learning the notes, obviously you can't play the whole passage fast yet, but you can certainly go and realize, oh yeah, wait, 1-5s don't seem to work. And so try your little bits of your if you're fingering fast. If you know it's going to go fast, that feels quite comfortable. I made another video about fingering where I talk about how to set yourself up for success from the beginning of the learning process in a new piece. You can check it out right there. I'll see you in the next video, and happy practicing.